recording this session, so if you're not okay with that, I guess you can go. Sorry, no, but we like to keep an archive of these on our website, so people who can't. I muted myself without realizing. Good morning again. Did you hear the message that we were recording this? Okay, just making sure. Thank you so much. My name is Matt Stinchcomb, and I'm one of the founders here at Partners for Climate Action. Partners for Climate Action was founded in 2019 with the goal to move multiple forms of capital to where they would be most relevant, efficient, and effective to catalyzing local action here in the estuary watershed of the Hudson River. At our core, we are funders who support our grantee partners with knowledge, tools, and connections, and whatever they need to be successful.
Cool.
I'm not touching anything, and it keeps muting me. So I don't know. I'll just keep going. I'm not sure what happened there. Okay, you can hear me now. I was just about to say, we rely on your support. So to date, we've deployed more than $4.6 million into climate restoration and resilience projects here in the Hudson Valley. And now more than ever, we need to, as Gary Snyder encouraged us, find our place on Earth, dig in, and take responsibility from there. So if you wish to make a donation, please visit climateactionhv.org. We're always grateful for your support. So with that, I'm very excited to have Karenna Gore here today. We're very grateful that she's taking some time out of her busy schedule to join us this very crazy time. Karenna is the founder and executive director of the Center for Earth Ethics and visiting professor of practice of Earth Ethics at Union Theological Seminary. Karenna founded the Center for Earth Ethics in 2015 to address the moral and spiritual dimensions of the climate crisis. Working at the intersection of faith, ethics, and ecology, she guides the center's public programs, educational initiatives, and movement building. She also is an ex officio faculty member of Columbia University's Earth Institute. Her previous experience includes serving as director of Union Forum at Union Theological Seminary, a platform for theological scholarship to engage with the civil discourse and social change. She also worked at the Legal Center for Sanctuary for Families, which serves victims of domestic violence and trafficking, was director of community affairs at the Association to Benefit Children, which provides early childhood education and other services for New York City families living in poverty. And she's the author of Lighting the Way, 9 Women Who Changed Modern America, and has written for numerous illustrious publications. She serves on the boards of the Association to Benefit Children and, of course, Riverkeeper, one of our great friends up here in the Hudson Valley, and is also an expert in the United Nations Harmony with Nature Knowledge Network, an online platform of practitioners, academics, and researchers. She's a graduate of Harvard College, earned her law degree from Columbia University, and has a master in social ethics from Union Theological Seminary. So, very impressive. And thank you so much for being here today, Karenna.
Thank you so much, Matt, and thank you to Partners for Climate Action in the Hudson Valley. I'm really excited and honored to be here, and I admire the work that you all do. I know that it is deep and substantial, and that you all also are very busy. So I'm delighted that we're able to spend some time together.
Thank you so much. So let's just jump right into it. You and I have had a couple conversations over the last week, and I feel like there's any number of avenues we could explore today, and always very interesting to hear your thoughts on things. But let's start with Earth ethics. Can you tell us what are Earth ethics, and what are the primary functions of the Center for Earth Ethics?
Well, thank you so much. And I should start by saying ethics is certainly not an exact science. It's not a set field or system. But it is It is more important than ever. It is really at the simplest distillation. It is the discernment between right and wrong and the implications for our behavior, both as individuals and as collectives. And so, as a field, it's distinct from laws, policies, and social norms. It of course undergirds a lot of society in that way. Our laws and social norms are sometimes based on ethical discernments like that, but it's most powerful when there is a deeply felt and more widely shared sense of right and wrong that is out of step with both laws and social norms. And of course, we can think back. It's why we often do in dialogues around these issues. We can think back to those other times when that was the case. So abolition of slavery and the civil rights movement are often raised up in that way. And you can think back that all of society, the laws, the social norms, were all on the side of something that was deeply immoral and wrong, and people gradually began to be able to express that in different ways. And this is the case now with the ecological crisis, with the climate crisis in particular, and all of the facets of it. Most of what is causing ecological destruction is perfectly legal and even socially encouraged. So we in ethics draw from those deeper wells of that sense of right and wrong, and work to express them and work to bring people to one mind around them in whatever way we can, so that we can change those laws and social norms accordingly.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point. You mentioned that it's socially encouraged, right? The ecological destruction. So I'm wondering if you could dig in a little bit more deeply to that. Like, what are some of the ways that, our policy or our attitudes are encouraging this, and by whom, and what might we do about it?
Well, let me say that another aspect of ethics is how you draw a circle of moral concern. So we know that there are ethics in there are professional ethics in different fields that would draw that circle in different ways. You have a set of obligations or expectations towards people that you work with, for example, that are distinct from those that you don't. How do we set our circle of moral concern in our civic discourse? And let's just say, I mean, they're different areas for that too, right? We have local, state, national, global. But in general, when we talk about most things, we talk about the economy. I mean, that is what it has come down to so much in our political discourse. I think we all know that. And so how do we draw the circle of moral concern there? There are three categories in which there are those who have are the most impacted by the decisions that are made, are simultaneously those least likely to have a voice. And that includes poor and marginalized people, future generations, and all non-human or more than human life. And so when you think about it, it's if those three categories had been at the table and considered all along, it's not only that it would be more fair to each of them, it actually would be more wise, because we wouldn't have gotten into this perilous situation. And so in the way that we like to draw from those deeper sources of wisdom that do sometimes come from faith and spirituality, we could lift up, as many have, for the same reason that I was mentioning before, for looking for those legacies. We can lift up the Martin Luther King Jr. quote about injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We can think about the Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh's encapsulation of the teaching that we are here to awaken to the illusion of our separateness. So to go back to the question that you asked, how do we see this? Well, we see this, for example, when there's any snapshot about the economy and how it's doing, it does not take into account any of those three categories. And yet it's lifted up as the utmost moral mandate of our time, right? And so we don't to think about future generations and how we're behaving and what we're encouraging when it is so focused on short-term monetary gain, no matter the pollution, no matter the depletion, is one example. And in other ways, we can see that, you know, this model of development, of progress, of success is one that really does not take into account the whole rest of the natural world as our interconnected web of life that we need to take care of if we're going to take care of ourselves, our future generations, and the whole living planet as a whole, which is another aspect of Earth ethics, is to recognize that we're in this global environment, that in fact, what we do here, and this is particularly true, you know, for those of us in the United States of America, we found ourselves in this situation where for reasons that have to do with historical forces beyond any one of our control, we have become preeminent in the world in this time in which there is a model of life. You call it the American dream, call it what you want, but that has been increasingly held up and exported as the model of success, the model of progress, the model of human flourishing at its greatest. And yet we know that, and this happens in messages we get all the time, you know, in advertising and in economic measurements, you know, in fixating on GDP growth and the stock market and all these things, and not on what is actually real in terms of air, water, land, groundwater, you know, the reality of existence that we're in. And so in this time, I think that to go back to your question, we have this opportunity because, you know, what happens to the global environment is actually an aggregate, right, of the pattern that has been set in each of these locations. And we here in the United States, in particularly in communities that have some measure of what would be called affluence, have the opportunity to reset that pattern in a way that might influence and change the trajectory. And it feels like a really huge undertaking. But in this place in the Hudson Valley, as you all well know, there's a great legacy of that shift that you all are the ones carrying and holding, and it's deeply important, I believe, to the whole world right now.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, there's a lot in there. You know, I completely agree that, like, you know, we are holding up the wrong examples of success, the wrong ideas of success. You know, as far back as I'm thinking of, you know, Limits to Growth in 1972, Danilo Meadows, E.F. Schumacher in 1969. A lot of these people are saying, like, this is a completely unsustainable path that we're on. You know, we've transcended all these planetary boundaries, yet we continue to you know, perpetuate all of these you know, really misguided ways of being. So, you know, one of the things that I'm curious to get your thoughts on is, like, what will it actually take for people to wake up? We know that this system is broken and fixed, as I think it was Ben Cohen who said that. You know, is it collapse? Like, this is a completely unsustainable system. Will it take collapse for us to actually shift the way that we think, or are there other pathways, and can they be, you know, taken in time?
Well, I mean, certainly, you know, a lot of people have raised that parallel to addiction and rock bottom, and, you know, does it take that for somebody to really change their ways? And I think that analogy is appropriate. But I also think that we don't need to no one wants to let their loved one, reach rock bottom before, because they don't always come back, right? And so crossing these tipping points or, I think that is the way to characterize them, is really not an option. That we can at all think is the turning point, because we do not know. I mean, we do have Western science, we have empirical science that we know is important, and even there, there is an admission of not knowing, right, where those lie exactly, among many of the finest scientists that will say that there are things that we do not know and that we have to start to understand as a species. The real question is, do we have the intelligence as a species to stop destroying our own habitat? And it's an open question. And I think all of these ways that we talk to each other, and in these political cycles, the way that we talk to each other can be very disheartening in that regard. But there's also, in addition to looking at that Western scientific expertise, we have some common sense. We have some wisdom. We know that there are elements, you say collapse, there are elements of that are upon us now. If we would look at them, if we would look at the correct measurements, we see that there's a large rise in what people label and categorize as mental health concerns, right? Mental health disorders, climate anxiety, ecological grief. There are ways in which human health is being impacted in ways also physically by the same systems that are hurting the health of the biosphere. And when we look around, and again, that's that getting through that illusion of separation, we can see that in fact some of that happens across sociological lines, across racial lines, across all kinds of sociological divides, whereby people are not thriving and flourishing in this society, and that is even the case among the most those who are said to be the most affluent, right, and the most successful. That if you look at young people, in that there's something missing, and that emotional and psychological and spiritual health is sometimes a good barometer of that. So I would say that we could probably look at ourselves as far enough into that that mode of what you would call maybe collapse, that we're there. In terms of the actual, most of us, we're living right now in habitable weather. I mean, just a couple of days ago, it was really smoky outside in Manhattan. There was smoke in the air from wildfires. It was difficult for some people to breathe. I mean, so we have to notice these things too, right? That these are messages that are part of a trajectory, that metaphor that's often lifted up of the frog that boils in the pot, right? Rather than the one that would immediately jump out if they were dropped in the boiling water already, is real in this time too, because we are experiencing some of these things that are not quite collapse, but are very serious weather events, that are connected to climate change, that I would say that we now have gone far enough down the line that if we communicate them well and process them well enough, could be turning points. But the truth is, I don't know. I think that it's an open question as to whether we'll get there.
Yeah, thank you for that. You gave a talk recently that I watched, and you said it's not the Earth that needs fixing, it's us. And I think that's kind of the point you're making right now too, right? That we actually have to shift our consciousness in how we see ourselves in relation to the Earth, and we also have to recognize, the situation that we're in. So I'm curious about, on an inner level, at Partners for Climate Action, we really feel that the and I think based on everything you're saying, you probably agree that this is a crisis of disconnection, right? We're disconnected from ourselves, we're disconnected from our neighbors, we're disconnected from the earth. And we see ecological restoration, people getting their hands dirty, reconnecting to the earth, reconnecting with their neighbors as a path to help facilitate that shift in consciousness of relationship. I'm curious if you have thoughts on the ways that we as individuals or as communities may accelerate that shift or deepen that shift in consciousness, and what are some of the ways that we can be fixed to living in more right relationship with the earth? And yeah.
Well, I first want to just applaud the work that you do. I think that that ecological restoration is really beautiful and important work, and it is indeed so much about repairing the relationship itself between human beings and the lands, the waters, the air that we live within, the other species. And there are, in fact, mental, physical, and emotional health benefits to this, just on a micro level. That for those that need studies about, there are in fact studies, that you can see that this is the case. It's medicine, right? For not just and of course there are many people, Robin Wall Kimmerer among them, who've written about this. Vine Deloria Jr. I mean, these are both indigenous authors that I cite, and there's, that's not an accident, but there are also people that have written about this as a kind of spiritual practice. I mean, that if in fact what ails you is deep discomfort about the awareness of the pace and the scale of ecological destruction around, to actually be part of healing not only whatever patch of land you find yourself on, but actually demonstrating the healing of the relationship by, the mind, body, spirit connection that can happen. A lot of times people hear about that in our modern consumer-oriented society. People will hear about that as a means of self-improvement, right? That, okay, this is going to make you be better at your job to get ahead if you get your mind, body, spirit, connection right. And in fact, that itself is that egocentric, individualized, competitive model sometimes is part of the pattern that is hurting so many. And so if you're doing acts of ecological restoration and there's a sense of belonging, that itself can be so of like medicine restoration for the people involved, for the communities as well, of course, because people come together in this way. And when you think about what we have in common, it's so much more obvious when we're talking when we see ourselves in the settings in which our species evolved, right? To be sentient, to have ways in which we're feeling the wind on our face and the smells of the trees and the soil and all of these things are actually deeply affecting in ways that that I think when we often have gotten away from, and when communities can come together around that, always did historically, right? In terms of back in human history, we have a few options of where we can go right now in our human story. Who are we as a species? We have a couple of different options, and probably we're going to have some combination. But the idea that right now, where we have this pace and scale of ecological destruction, where we have this technological revolution that has really gone so fast that many of us, who are I was born in the early 70s. So, in some ways, I'm always shocked by how often the early 70s come up as a point of and you too, Matt, we're the same age. So so as a point of a shift in awareness that, because they saw the picture of the Earth, for the first time from outer space shortly before that, and because things were happening, like rivers were catching on fire, and people were starting to be aware that things being treated, externalities not being counted, and things being treated just as sewers and garbage dumps, in fact, this was going to come back to get us, right? And so that that awareness happened in that time, and there was some progress made, obviously, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and Endangered Species Act, and the EPA established, and all these things. But then at the same time, since then, we have had, more than half of the wild animal species population get wiped out. Even more than that of birds and aquatic life. We've had the emissions, and thank you so much for staying focused on that in this group. The emissions go up so that we're filling this thin shell of atmosphere with greenhouse gas emissions that we know exactly what they're going to do, and we keep doing it anyway, to charge up and disrupt the climate system to be chaotic. So it's really like we're in this amazing paradox of the most awareness that we've ever had and the most destructive pattern. So what to do about it? Back to your focus on ecological restoration. I mean, we need to come, and different people have said this. I'm going to try not to be too academic because I'm a little bit in academia, and usually when people say something, they have to say like every other person that said it, but there are many people that have said we have to come down to earth, and really, re-inhabit the places where we live, and start to see reality around us. And then we are going to be much more capable of solving, if you like that word, facing, encountering and transforming the global environmental challenge.
Wow, thank you for that. I also couldn't agree more. You mentioned hitting rock bottom earlier. I'm sure for a lot of us right now, the results of the most recent election are very top of mind. And kind of to your point, right? There was that moment in the 1970s. In many ways, we are in this really, right, this paradoxical moment. But we're also, I think on the precipice of very regressive federal policy around climate and ecological restoration. We're going to see the rolling back of a lot of these protections that are in place. And, I'm curious, like, where do we go from here, in the light of what's before us, which is very disheartening to those of us who are, in this space. And I'm curious if you have thoughts on politics right now. I'm sure you do. Obviously, you're very connected to this space. Is there an opportunity here for reimagination of our politics? Is there a new role that state and municipal government could be playing? Like, I don't know. What are your thoughts on this moment on how we might respond politically?
Well, I really, like a lot of you, am still processing the what just happened, and part of that is, I think, for many of us, and we certainly see this, if we tune into the many conversations and analyses that are going on, where there's this thing called, confirmation bias, right? What you already thought was the problem, you're going to look for a confirmation that of your own worldview. That said, I really believe that it is time for a full-throated and clear and heartfelt environmentalism in the center of our public discourse. That we have to talk about the climate crisis, the ecological crisis, with our full selves and what we know to be true, and not lead with the political strategies and the consultant speak that will seemingly, supposedly get us the votes and percentages that we need to win. And I was so disheartened and dispirited to see what felt like a big step backwards in public discourse around the issue of climate in this past election cycle. And I don't, this is something that I felt about the media as much as about the candidates, about the way questions were framed in debates and interviews, the way in which people did not bother to really put before us as a people this existential and vital issue in a way that we can actually figure out what to do about it. No, it's not easy. No one is saying that it is, but we were not even given the framework in which to have a real conversation about it. And I know that, there may have been some forums and some venues where this happened, and it's very difficult to speak about anything now because the information ecosystem is so fragmented. But I'm talking about, to the extent that there's any kind of mainstream conversation that most people are paying attention to, that's what I'm talking about. And so I really believe that, to the extent that one of the things that American voters and the public at large, and I think across, and I'm not talking about any particular group, but I'm talking about at least in my experience, what I've heard and picked up on, and not just in this election cycle, but in multiple ones, is a deep desire for authenticity and for getting away from the political consultant language that is so obviously manufactured, right? So obviously polished up, and in a way, this is the same thing as consumerism, right? It's something that people, it's like hireling hearts, like, have come up with this, not beating hearts of real people who aren't doing it for money, right? So I believe that it's really important. And if you look deeper underneath the very polarized country, you can see some conversations that are alive in what would be called the right wing or the libertarian, even, but also across the board of who would call themselves, conservative or these things. You can see conversations that are actually alive there that are about basically what could be translated to standing up to the forces that we know are behind ecological destruction, which do involve big corporate interests that are profit driven, that in terms of industrial toxins would prioritize the profit to be had in continuing that way of doing business over air, water, soil, health, the ability of people to connect to land, and be in community, in local economies in a healthy way. So I don't know if there's I think that the best place to depolarize on those issues is locally, is bioregionally. And I do believe that there is some opportunity here for this. We have to keep our eye on the bigger global picture. We have to keep, there's this other thing going on, which is that sometimes people will downplay, right, the importance of reducing emissions and say, oh, it's not all about that. We just have to plant trees and we have to restore things. No. We have to really keep our eye on decreasing emissions, and I think be absolute, what they call hawks about that. But at the same time, I do believe that there's a huge potential for depolarizing and for getting to a better place with this local bioregionalism work, with the ecological restoration work, with exactly what you all are focused on.
Yeah, I thank you for that. I couldn't agree also again more. I've always thought that our common ground is our common ground. And actually, we don't really want different things on different sides of the political spectrum. Everybody wants to have a place that's thriving. They want to have clean air. They want to have clean water. They want to have a healthy place for their children to grow up. And in a way, it is, I mean, not in a way, in every way, it's just so disheartening that a lot of these issues have been politicized, much to the detriment of all. We've got only 20 more minutes. I just want to invite people to start asking questions. We're going to cover a couple other topics, but if you want to start putting questions in the chat, we will switch to a Q&A in a little bit. I wonder if you could, one of the things that we talked about briefly when we spoke last week, Karenna, was geoengineering. And I'm really particularly interested in this subject because I do feel like it's, there's kind of a whole like capitalist idea behind it. It's like, oh, we can keep doing what we want and we can grow the economy by inventing these new technologies that are going to save us, and we don't have to change anything about what we're doing. And I think when you dig into geoengineering, and I'm glad to see that Anton's here, Anton Simon, climate scientist at Bard and other places, I know who also shares a lot of concerns about geoengineering. I remember during his morning coffee webinar, he mentioned models showing that, yes, we could release fine particles into the upper atmosphere and actually cool the Earth, but reduce rainfall in the Amazon by 50%. At least these are, and Anton, I'm probably getting this wrong, but that's how I remember it. Something like that. And, the moral implications of geoengineering are crazy. Like, who gets to decide for whom? The other example that Anton gave was, someone like Elon Musk, right? The cost of releasing these particles was something like $10 billion, and that's, an accounting error for him. And now, horrifyingly, he may be, setting policy decisions for this country. So I'm curious about your thoughts on geoengineering, and is there a role for it in addressing the climate crisis?
Well, I think that the main problem with geoengineering is what is called a moral hazard. And that is that it is one of these tech solutions that is lifted up in part to make it seem as if we don't have to do the work of reducing fossil fuel emissions. And because there are so many very powerful and rich interests in not having to change the status quo to reduce those emissions, there's a lot of research money available for it, and there's a lot of enthusiasm for making it seem as if this is a possibility. It also fits, of course, into this thought pattern, and we can go back, and I won't do it all right now, but if there's a follow-up, and you want to go there, to the whole thought system that goes back to the doctrine of discovery, to the kind of Western scientific model that is often very blind to the interrelationships, that has a very hubristic, anthropocentric kind of domination model that we often don't think about the way that there are a lot of people that consider themselves quite secular and free from any religious bias or teaching, that nonetheless themselves or within the society that they're in have a subliminal teaching that human beings are made in the image of God, and that the correct interpretation of that is that human beings and only human beings, and that the correct interpretation of that is that we can, in having dominion, have complete domination, and that is somehow this divine mandate that will protect us, right? And this is this is an interpretation of theology. I'm at a theological seminary, remember, so that has had an impact on the world that we're in. So that this is in many ways an ultimate expression of it, right? That the hubris would be, okay, it's the same thought pattern, it's the same idea that, you know, that got us here, which is that we're not going to pay attention to our externalities. We're not going to pay attention to the consequences of these actions in terms of actually the reality that we live in, which is composed of many, many other living beings that are not just here as resources for us. They actually are alive. And to instead just say, okay, we're gonna do this in this way that's gonna get the result that we want, is the same thought pattern and hubristic way of doing it. Okay, so the moral hazard is that it will take our eye off the actual thing that we need to do, and that there's people that want that. And the other thing is that it is very, very risky. That that among the serious scientists, and that's in the Western, you know, science model, who've looked at this, there are many that raise concerns about it for exactly those reasons, the unknown factors of the web of life that we're in. You know, this Elizabeth Colbert wrote a book called Under a White Sky, The Nature of the Future, which is one of many that raises the question of, you know, what happens if we have reflective particles in the atmosphere that make it so that no one ever sees the stars again, you know? How do you quantify that? What does that, is it worth it to not have tried really, really hard to reduce our emissions instead? Is it really worth it? Who sets that conversation? Who decides, right? So it's up to us. This is where ethics comes in. How do we measure and put forward those kinds of values that are not all about the things that get measured by business accounting models or economic models, right? Okay, so the best argument on the side of doing it, the experiments. Okay, doing the experiments, which is basically where we are now for geoengineering, which is that one aspect of it is solar radiation management, which is the most kind of, you know, what we think of in terms of the experiments to inject reflective particles up into the air. And this is not to be confused with what, you know, there is a kind of widespread more of, you know, I use the term conspiracy theory very, very gingerly, but there are folks that would say this is going on a massive scale already. I don't think so, no. But it is in fact being put out there as a possible solution. And there are people, including Harvard University, who've invested a lot of money in it. And the best case that is made for continuing these experiments, even given the moral hazard, is that we don't know what's coming. And so the imagining of a time in which we have not confronted this in a way that that gets us anywhere near a habitable and livable planet, and people are running away from fire tornadoes and so on, you know, if we haven't even figured out how that works, we will have messed up. And the other second, you know, best argument for doing it is that someone else will do it if we don't do the experiments and figure out that, okay, here's like the thing is held out there that maybe it won't work. Okay, let's find that out and then write up a study about it and tell people it doesn't work and then somehow ban it, right? So those are in my estimation, and there are, you know, people that make these arguments. But I really, my concerns about it are that to talk about it is to talk about it as a viable solution is to normalize it, and to have places like these universities that really, unfortunately, like so many other parts of our society, are responding to money as opposed to deeper values and deeper intellectual integrity. To have them be a part of normalizing it, I find very troubling. So I'd be very curious to hear from the other folks here who have expertise on that. That's a little bit of my take on it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you touch on some interesting points there too. And one of the questions talks a little bit about religion and spiritual institutions. When we spoke yesterday, we talked about the role of education right now, and we talked about how, historically there may have been a religious institution that was more a part of someone's ethical education and moral upbringing, but that energy has shifted. So, and you just right now talked about the problem of a lot of money, right, being given to our academic institutions, right, which may direct the nature of what's being studied or taught. And so I'm curious now about ethics in education, and where do you think the opportunities are? Where are the interventions? How might we actually cultivate the moral frameworks in people, so that we're not repeating the same mistakes, with things like geoengineering? Kind of a big question, but I'm curious about the role of education and ethics.
I think education is very important, and it happens on a lot of levels. I mean, one of the things that I think we need to take a good look at now is also the problematic nature of elite education, that we don't want to reinforce. I mean, some of the wisdom and knowledge that we need in order to face this ecological crisis owes nothing to the academy, right? In fact, quite the opposite. It comes from traditional ecological knowledge holders. In many cases, it has been held in folk wisdom. In many ways, I was thinking about this and the ecological restoration work in particular, looking. I'm sorry to cite something. I try not to be too academic, but the Vine Deloria Jr., who's a native writer, wrote this piece about prospects for restoration on tribal lands back in 1992. And he was talking about American education has trained this generation of young Indians to think of their lands as a resource rather than a place. And he goes into the deleterious effects of education on a lot of traditional peoples and ways. And I think that is we've seen that be true of so many of us, right? We feel like in many ways the whole model of education has kind of acclimates you out of the natural world, and focuses you on other things. Now, what is the role of education? Of course, education is much bigger than our educational institutions and systems the way they exist right now, right? And that is where those of us, even me knowing who Vine Deloria is, right, has to do with my education. So we have to be able to spread the knowledge and the reach and the insights and the awareness of a broader field of thought than has always been, in the training that has happened, where people are. And what is that thing you quoted to me in a conversation one time? Your great teacher, David Orr, who I also admire, said something about what education did before and what it needs to do now. Can you say that, Matt?
Yeah, it's something like the skills, aptitudes, and attitudes needed to industrialize the earth are very different from those needed to heal the planet, build durable economies, and good communities. I think that's it. Right. And so that's a big question that I've always sitting with too, right? Like what are the specific skills that we need, and what are the ways of thinking about ourselves in relation to the world? And that really is the role of education.
Yeah. And I just have one other thing that I wanted to say, which is that, there is work. So there can be inquiries into the field of religion and faith and spirituality. It does not have to be done in a way that is proselytizing one particular religion. And so I do not think that people should shy away from that type of education, because it is in those traditions, those wisdom traditions, which come from all over the world and all different backgrounds, that a lot of people have over many, many generations kind of thought about the meaning of life. What are we doing here? What is the point of all this? What are some of the traps that people fall into? What are ways out of them? How can we be focused on communal health and common good, even though each individual one may try to think they're the best? How do we think long term? Back to our ancestors, forward to the future generations. How do we keep that in mind? It's hard. There are ways that we do it. We practice. We have teachings. We have rituals. We have ceremonies. These are things that we can access and still maintain freedom of religion or belief, and still maintain options for being completely secular. So you do it through interfaith dialogue, through inter-religious, inter-spiritual awareness, and I think that is an important field. So that said, and one of the ways that I feel this path has been able to be so fruitful for what I would say I've been living in the past decade is because two of the strongest sources have been indigenous traditions and Pope Francis. So in historical terms, there has been, and this is on the issue of ecology, to be clear, right? Not on every single issue do I agree with Pope Francis, but there's a historical conflict there, right? That many indigenous peoples have been to the Vatican to say, we need apologies for the forced, doctrine of discovery conversion, for the force of empire landing here and being so genocidal and oppressive and destructive in the way that the church as an institution was complicit in that. And so even just that conversation and the way that it happens has been inspiring to watch it unfold. And then you see the commonalities that kind of come out because our secular world is separate from both of those streams right now. The dominant, commercial commodification of nature, commercialization of everything is separate. So I'm leading up to just reading something that Pope Francis wrote in Laudato Si, which is all about education. And environmental education has broadened its goals. This is paragraph 210 for those that have Laudato Si, and I recommend it. Has broadened its goals, whereas in the beginning it was mainly centered on scientific information, consciousness raising, and prevention of environmental risks. It tends now to include a critique of the myths of modernity, grounded in a utilitarian mindset, individualism, unlimited progress, competition, consumerism, the unregulated market. It seeks also to restore various levels of ecological equilibrium, establishing harmony within ourselves, with others, with nature and other living creatures, and with God. Just an example. And then also it goes into saying, look, ecological education takes place in different places. I would stress the great importance of the family, which is a gift of God. In the face of a so-called culture of death, the family is at the heart of the culture of life. Okay. So some of us may be offended by the way in which so-called family values have been used to diminish people, to judge people, but we can't actually ignore the wisdom and the heartfelt, sentiment and the realness of understanding that educations and families and communities are actually really, really important places for us to nourish and to recognize that even though it's not valued in the consumer secular society, it is deeply, deeply important that we take care of these places and that we fortify ourselves and each other and other families to be able to do the education there as well and honor that. So I think education is incredibly important. I think we should turn the classrooms inside out as much as possible in different levels of education to try to have kids know, where does your water come from? Where does your waste go? When you turn on the light, where does the power come from? All these things. And bioregionalism as a field has been promoting this for decades. And I think it's really exciting time to do it.
Thank you so much for that. Turning now to some of the questions that have been coming in. There's a couple that are, I think looking for maybe what we're all feeling right now. It's like, what do we do as individuals? Like, how might we meet this moment? What are the things that could happen? One person writes that they're, fighting in my own backyard for better local land use policy, and losing, and looking for help. So, at this moment right now, do you have any thoughts or advice on how we might actually meet this moment?
Well, and to the person that wrote that, I think so many people are feeling the stressors of these, the encroachment of development and all of these projects and destructive patterns. How we might meet this moment, I think, come together. I think exactly what you all are doing is a lot of it to break the isolation, to find our communities where we can talk. And I have to say, I've been to a social occasion for Partners for Climate Action in the Hudson Valley, which was really nice. So I know it's not all Zoom calls. And I think that coming together and talking, and then also, like, we have to engage with our media and with our civic institutions more. We have to write, just show up, write them letters, call them, all that stuff. It's sort of tedious. Tim Guinea is here. He's very good at it. And he's on the board of advisors of the Center for Earth Ethics, I'm happy to say. And many of you all do this on a regular basis, but that's what I've got. And I think we find our way together.
Thank you. So we're just about at the end of our conversation today. I'm curious, just as a closing question for you, Karenna, and it's just another big one. Like, what do you think we should do about education? I'm curious what brings you hope today at this moment. What are the bright spots that you're seeing? And I don't know, to leave on an uplifting note.
Well, I feel like it is true. Many of us who have been in pain in the last week about what's happened politically have taken comfort and inspiration from the many teachings and examples from people that have been through worse in terms of a sense of alienation or defeat in some way about something they deeply care about, or a sense of fear about the direction that things are heading. And I think that we can know that there is a metaphysic involved that does apply in all of these situations, which is that something can rise from ashes, something can grow stronger. The grit for the oyster, produces the pearl. We are in that situation now, and I do believe that that there's something at work that will help us on its own by virtue of some of the difficulties and the hardships. I also, because in the work that I do, am able to be in conversation and community with people of lots of different backgrounds who want to learn about earth ethics. It's very humbling to try to present that as a field to people, because it is as we've said, it's very dynamic, and the sources that you draw from and the way that you present it is not necessarily obvious. But I feel so excited when I see the excitement in people, and it's I have to say, it's people of all ages. There are young people, but there are also older people in these courses who come through, and people are lit up with a new level of perception and motivation. So that does make me feel good.
Karenna, thank you so much for being with us today and taking this time. Thank you to all of you for coming and joining us. We'll put this on our website soon, and if there's other resources that were discussed in the call, we'll include that on the website and send them out via email to all those who registered. Thank you again, Karenna. Very interesting conversation. I think you're right on.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Goodbye, everybody.